we're at 7 something here, and I'm going to introduce Andy and then turn it over to uh, Lisa to moderate. I want to thank so many people who have contributed so much to making our Holocaust Remembrance Week, as powerful and as important as it is. Desiree Matherly delivered a very brilliant essay on Monday, and we couldn't be more happy with the result of that. And Peter Knoll, he coordinated the Shoah exhibition for us, and he had amazing ideas for what that should be and what that should look like, and we're so grateful to him for that. And we're also grateful to him and Bill Bledsoe and Lana and their students for helping make that part happen. And Brian Ricker, the director of I Never Saw Another Butterfly, that premieres tomorrow night at 7 p.m. in Annie Hogenberg and plays and shows throughout the weekend. And of course, Frank Mingle, who is always brilliant in his design work, who makes every play that we have come alive in a way that we never, that just amazing ways, really. And of course, Jennifer Hollowell, who, I don't know where Jennifer is. I think I saw her, or there she is. She had a hand in every bit of this as the arts outreach coordinator, and she consistently, without fail, always does a great job for us, and with little fanfare. And so I'm going to try to make a point to make sure that she gets credit where credit is due. And for tonight's event, I really need to thank Lisa, who's going to moderate this for us. And because without Lisa Andrews, this couldn't happen. I'm so grateful to her too. And Andy, of course, I'm so grateful to you. And I'm going to read the bio that we have for you, but I just thought I would say that I know that we've only met twice virtually, but I think I love you, man. I just love you so much because you're a truly astounding human being. Your energy is so rich and positive, and it's an inspiration to everybody. And I admire the life that you've lived, the way that you've dealt with the struggles that you shouldn't have had to deal with, and the way that you became the person that you are. And most importantly, I admire so much your commitment to educating young people. You're a truly astounding human being, and I cannot wait to shake your hand next year, hopefully, right? Soon.
I hope so.
Bring you to campus. But let me read your official bio so that everybody understands who exactly you are. Endre Andy Sarkany, a 1961 Tusculum University graduate in mathematics first and physics, was born in Hungary on October 31st, 1936. He lived in a Jewish ghetto throughout the Third Reich's reign. For the past decade, he has been educating students about his personal experiences during the Holocaust, living under the brutality of the Soviet regime, and finding a home in the United States. Sarkany grew up in a building in Budapest that housed a nursery kindergarten on the ground floor and a dance, acrobatics, and ballet studio on the top floor. The school was affiliated with the Jewish Agency of Hungary and was led by Eugene, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing what I wrote here. Is it Philray?
Polnai.
Polnai. These facts were significant in his survival and that of at least 150 orphan children. Andy's father was taken to a concentration camp in the spring of 1944. Fortunately, he survived. After World War II, Hungary became a communist nation. Although Andy graduated high school in 1955, he was not accepted to university because he was deemed an undesirable element of society. a label given to anyone who owned a business before the communists took over the country. Andy escaped Hungary after the October 1956 uprising and immigrated to the United States. After graduating from Tusculum, he went on to earn a Master of Science in Applied Mathematics and Computer Science from Washington University in St. Louis, a very brilliant school, by the way. Andy worked for both McDonnell Douglas Corporation and the IBM Corporation. He is married and has a daughter, a son, and 5 grandchildren. And in my 15 plus years at Tusculum, one of the best honors I have is to say, welcome, Andy. And
thank you very much. Thank you. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Andy. Are you ready to do this?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Everyone, I just would like to ask you if you have any questions at the end. We're going to have a Q&A. If you would put them in the chat, and we will do our best to facilitate and get through all of them. So as your questions pop into your mind, you could put them in the chat as Andy's speaking, and then we'll get to them towards the end. So everybody's on mute, and please respect that at this time. We'll go through the chat and have a Q&A at the end. So thank you very much. Enjoy. And Andy, I'm going to share my screen with everyone. Can you see that, Andy?
Yes, I do.
Everyone, we're good?
Very good.
Okay, whenever you're ready, go ahead, Andy.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Dean. And it is really an honor to talk to you as Tusculum students. And I had a marvelous year in my senior year on campus, but it was a long time ago. So in any event, I will try to describe my life. I am not a historian, so I just will interact some historical points and will tell you 3 phases of my life. One, when I was a young kid during the Holocaust era. Then the second piece is Soviet brutality during my high school years. And a third piece, escaping the country and having the opportunity to come to the greatest country in the world called the United States of America. So the first slide will actually show a little bit of my bio, please. That one, it basically tells everything about me, which is important. Actually, the slide was prepared a year ago, so actually I have been married over 50 years. I have been speaking in a public school and public libraries, synagogues, churches over the last 10 plus years, and actually last school year, the 2019 school year, I spoke in over 80 schools to most of the time high school kids. So the next slide will give you a little bit of geography so then you can understand where Hungary is. And the red circle shows that tiny little country in Eastern or Central Europe. And the next slide will tell you a little bit more around the surrounding countries of Hungary. On the west side, you will see Austria with the capital city of Vienna. On the north, it used to be Czechoslovakia, and obviously we know that it broken up into 2 countries. Slovakia used to be a long time ago be part of the territory of Hungary, and most people do speak Hungarian there. And when we are moving to the east, a little swivel is Ukraine, and the rest of the east and the southeast is Romania. And when we move to the southwest, it used to be the country called Yugoslavia, and the closest one to Hungary is Slovenia, Croatia, and Serbia. Other significant geographical importance is the river Danube, The Danube is coming from the Black Sea. I'm sorry, from going into the Black Sea, coming from the Black Forest in a border of Austria and Germany. It's almost coming in a straight line into Hungary, and in the middle of the country, in the north part, it takes a 90-degree turn, going south, eventually end up in a Black Sea. Budapest is about 50 miles south of that dogleg. Budapest used to be two cities, Buda on the west side, Pest in the east side, and in the mid-1800s, the two cities merged, creating Budapest, the capital city of the country. So this is just a little geography. The next slide is very important, and when I put this slide together, I didn't know the author, but the author is a German Lutheran pastor. His name is Martin Niemöller, and it has significance of that time. And let me read it. First, they came for the communists, and I did not object, for I was not a communist. They came for the socialists, and I did not object because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the labor leaders, and I did not object because I was not a labor leader. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not object because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to object. So we need to put that in perspective, how important to know who we are, where we are, and what our purpose in life. The next slide is a significant quotation from the book of Nights by Elie Wiesel, and it says, whoever listens to a witness becomes a witness. Therefore, you who listening to me, you are become a witness because you are hearing a personal story of someone who survived Nazi Hungary and also Soviet brutality and come to the free world, the United States of America. Other reason it is important because unfortunately in the 21st century, there are many people who will say that the Holocaust never happened. And here I am. I'm a survivor as a child, and I know then it happened. Most of my family were perished, murdered by the Nazis. So don't ever forget it, the significance of the history of the 1930s and the 1940s. And I'd like to just show you in the next slide a number. We say 6 million, but when you see the number, it's a huge number. That many creative life were murdered just because they were Jews. And we say never again. Now, historically, we know, in the next slide we'll show you, that Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany of January 30, 1933. From that moment on, Jewish life deteriorated in a very rapid phase, not only in Germany, but in Europe in general. And at that time, the Hungarian government were almost immediately aligned itself with Nazi Germany. The next historical fact, which is significant, is 1938. And the next slide will show you that. It's called Kristallnacht, translated into English, the Night of the Broken Glass. On November 9th and 10th, during those 2 days, practically every Jewish businesses were broken in, ransacked. Jews were rounded out from their homes, made them to march. They were beaten, physically and verbally abused. And it was really, to me, the beginning, the Holocaust. The next slide will just show you one picture I took from Google, how the stores were broken in. But the significant thing is when you're looking at the left side, you will see a symbol called swastika. It is a Nazi symbol, and I will come back to it a little bit later. Now, the next slide will actually show you how the Hungarian leader and Hitler had a pact. This picture I was able to take from Google, which was taken in 1944, but this happened then the Hungarian leader Miklos Horthy, who was a regent, met Hitler prior to it and made a pact with Nazi Germany with respect to Hungary, making the commitment to fulfill Hitler's mission. See, Hitler has a vision to creating a pure nation, a superior race. It's called the Aryan race. It was nothing else but a racial purification policy, what he established. Not only killing all the Jews, which was a primary target, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Gypsies, or sometimes it's called the Romans, all the handicapped people, and there were some other groups of people who fall into that category. And that was Hitler's mission. Now, the significant part is that how we were moved through history, the alliance slowly but surely deteriorated. But in related to my life, let's go to the next slide, and I will address my family. My father and my mother were born in Hungary. My father was born in Budapest, and he owned a small construction business with his father and was able to make a middle-class life for themselves. My mother was born in a small village about 6 to 8 miles south of the city of Budapest on a river bank on a past side, namely the east. The significance of that little village that beside the Hungarian native tongue, practically everybody spoke a very distinct, very difficult German dialogue called Schwab. And if you look up today, the German map, on a southwest corner, there is Swabia. It's a very complicated dialogue, and most Germans even had difficulty of understanding. My parents got married in 1935 and was able to survive the difficult life because by that time, Nazi Germany's influence in Hungary increased substantially. Hungary had a Nazi party called the Arrow Cross Party. And as soon as Hitler came to power, the membership of that party swelled up. Young, old, men, women, all joined in and made it sure that Hitler's mission was exterminating all the Hungarian Jews will take place. Just briefly, Hungary had between 8 and 9 million of population at the time. And about 650,000 of them were Jews. The majority of the population, over 90%, were Roman Catholic, and there were some other religious groups existed. Now, significant of the building, that in the ground floor, what you see, it was a nursery, kindergarten, fully equipped. The top floor, what you see, those large windows, it was a ballet, acrobat, and a dance studio. There were plenty of empty space. How in the introduction was said, then this building became an orphanage for over 150 Jewish children ages from 3 to 13. As a caveat, all except one survived. One person had tuberculosis, and we really had no medication or care for him, and he died during the Holocaust. These children were taken care of by people who lived in the building. Some of them were just housewives. There were 3 ladies who actually was affiliated with the nursery kindergarten school. Now, my father had a friend who suggested him to move into the 7th district of Budapest. And this building is in the 7th district. Budapest had 24 districts, and the 7th district was very heavily populated. I could say probably 85% were Jews. There were significant synagogues, kosher restaurants, bakeries, grocery stores, accommodating the needs of the Jewish community. His friend suggested to my father, when we lived in a fashionable area outside of that area, renting a condominium, hey Steve, I want you to move into the 7th district. It's safety, and also it is better for your family. My father took his advice and moved into this building, what you see. And that was one of the wisest things I ever did. However, moving in the 1940s, my father was disappeared more often than you could count. He was taken to forced labor camps. Jews were rounded up, taken to various areas outside the periphery of the city, into factories to work with no pay, with no assistance of anything to survive for the war effort, actually supporting Nazi Germany. Every now and then my father was able to come home. My mother was able to bribe the guard with the little savings what my parents had to bring him home. And moving to 1943, that's when I went to first grade. I was held back because of my birth in end of October. What happened? My mother enrolled me to school, which was about 2.5 blocks away from this building. And she said, I'm going to show you how to get there. And the next slide will show you the school where I went to. And believe it or not, it's still a school. On that picture, what you have seen before, the ground floor is still a nursery, kindergarten. So my mother took me to the school. And after about 2 weeks, she said, Andy, you can walk to the school by yourself. It's only 2 blocks. And remember, it was 1943. There was not many cars existed at that time. The streets were very empty, so it was very safe to cross streets. We didn't have street guards. So I was walking there. And believe it or not, on that 2 blocks walking, I was spit on, called me a dirty Jew. I was pushed down on a pavement. I was kicked. I was abused verbally and physically. You know why? Because I am a Jew. There was no other reason. What did I do wrong as a 7-year-old? Nothing. But my religion and the mission what Hitler had with the Hungarian government. So I told my mother, I cannot go to school. It's impossible. And my mother said, you stay home, and when I can take you to school, I will take you, because she had to make a living because my father wasn't around. However, moving to the beginning of 1944, my father was able to come home from forced labor camp, and he and my mother made a decision to trying to find family members who lived outside of the 7th district and the periphery of the city of Budapest, and get them to move into our 2-bedroom apartment, which was on the top floor of the building what we have seen before. And actually, we were 12 of us living in that 2-room apartment. My mother's older sister and her family, my mother's younger brother with his family, my grandparents on my father's side and my grandmother from my father's side and my grandmother on my mother's side. And we were trying to just survive almost day by day. And it was a very difficult time for all of us. The children came to our building, and how did they get there? Well, sometimes children were left behind because the Nazis took their parents to all the concentration camps, death camps. Some means there are the kids left behind. Neighbors and friends brought these children to the Jewish agency, and they brought it into our building. And some parents or parent were bringing their own child for safekeeping to our building because they felt then they were able to survive there. While they knew that the places where they lived will be sooner or later overrun by the Nazis and they will be taken away and there will be no future. So now, my father disappeared by end of February. And when I asked my mother, what happened with Dad? Prior to it, she was covering up by saying, well, he had to go to work to help the war effort. But end of February, when he disappeared, my mother just told me, says, that's not a subject to discuss. And I never did ask my mother about my dad for a long, long time. How we were moving into March. By that time, the relationship between the Hungarian government and Nazi Germany deteriorated quite a bit. And Hitler got fed up what was going on in Hungary, particularly in Budapest, to deport and kill the Jews. Now, I mentioned to you earlier, there were about 650,000 Hungarian Jews lived in the country. The Jews in the periphery and outside of the city of Budapest were very much rounded up and taken to various camps, death camps, or forced labor camps. But Budapest, some means or other, was not hit. By middle of March, and March 19th, and please show the next slide. Hitler sent his military, the SS and the German military into Hungary and into Budapest. I have seen with my naked eye how the SS marched in wearing the armband with a swastika, in black boots, marching in goose steps. My grandfather took me out to a major boulevard called the Ring Road, which is on the west side of Budapest. It's a semicircle road which comes from the north part of the river in Budapest to the south. A beautiful wide boulevard. There were thousands and thousands of people were lined up watching them and cheering the Nazis to coming into Hungary. And my grandfather took me there because we lived only about 3 blocks from there. And I have seen this horror, this terrible picture. This was actually, took it from Google because I couldn't get anything closer to represent what was really happening in the city of Budapest. And a short while, my grandfather said, I take you home, we have seen more than enough. And on the way home, he said, Andy, our life as Jews and as human beings will change forever. As a 7-year-old, I really didn't understand what he was talking about. But that picture I never forget. I have seen the SS marching in. Now for a moment, I like to just freeze history in 1944. And I like to show you the next slide, which, would you believe it, was taken in August of 2017 in Charlottesville, Virginia. A bunch of thugs, hoodlums, white supremacists, Nazi supporters, neo-Nazis were marching, and they were wearing the same armband with a swastika, which I have seen as a 7-year-old in 1944. They were screaming the same kind of a slogan, "Death to the Jews. The Jews are bloodsuckers. They should be eliminated. They don't belong to our society." When I went home and I have seen that on the screen on television, newscast, I couldn't believe that such a thing can happen in the greatest country in the world called the United States of America. The Nazis are here, and anti-Semitism, unfortunately, growing. The following day of this demonstration, our president gave a speech, and he said, and I paraphrase his sentence, "There were good people on both sides. I have news for you. There is no good Nazi. The Nazi have only two purposes in life: to create hate and promote it, and two, to kill." That attitude slaughtered over 6 million Jews. It cannot be tolerated in this country or any other country, today or ever in the future. We have to condemn it, and we have to fight. And I like to tell you another thing. There is no vaccine against hatred. We have to together work to overcome. And at this time, I like to suggest two things. One, please wipe out of your vocabulary the word hate permanently. Don't ever use it. We have a lot of other words in our dictionary which can describe our dislike. So make sure then that word never exists on your lip. And I like to suggest to replace that 4-letter word with the other 4-letter word called love. Because love is providing you care, respect, honor, outreach, compromise, and stability. And if you look up the dictionary of those words, what it means, you will understand how significant love is. And that's what we have to build on. And we have to have hope. So now, go back to 1944. And the next slide will show that Adolf Hitler sent in a master killer, Adolf Eichmann, to Hungary for one purpose: to slaughter all the Hungarian Jews, one way or other. And he managed in an assembly line to deport to their death over 550,000 Hungarian Jews. And the majority of these Jews ended up in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Some ended up in Mauthausen, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, and some other death camps. He created an environment, particularly in Budapest, to ship the Jews as quickly as possible. His presence from April 1 to middle of August created that mass exodus by Jews to their death. The next slide will show you a map of Europe, and ignore the colors of the dots, but these dots representing forced labor camps, concentration camps, and death camps. And you will see on the left side Auschwitz-Birkenau, Lublin, Majdanek, and some other death camps. By the way, Auschwitz-Birkenau is two cities. Birkenau was more a forced labor camp, and Auschwitz was where all the crematorium were set up to burn the Jews. When we move into the west, Mauthausen, which is in the bottom of the slide, was in Austria. Then you will see very close by Dachau in Germany, Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, and they were the major ones which practically everybody is familiar with. But just look at the map. Thousands of these. Now the next slide, it's very significant to me as a person. On the left, you will see a picture of my parents, my mother and my father. It was taken in 1940. It was in a village where my mother was born. But the significance of the other picture, which is on the left, if you will see my father in a concentration camp, far left, in 1944. He just probably was arrived or taken to this concentration camp because he still was wearing his civilian clothing, his hat, and a closer look at the picture with his eyeglasses. Now the next slide will show you how Jews were actually transported to the various death camps, particularly to Auschwitz-Birkenau. This particular picture is a real one and stands in front of the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp today. And if you can read, it says an original German freight car, like those the Nazis used to transport Jews to concentration camps. And the second piece, which is significant, many German companies use slave laborers in the Second World War, and they were all Jews. Now the next slide will show you the horror of what the Nazis created. How the Jews were packed into cattle cars like sardines. They couldn't barely breathe. There was no food, no water, no facilities there. Most of those Jews died while they were shipped from one location to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And this is what you can see, how they were released. They were children, adults, men, women, young, elderly. It made no difference. Now, if you're looking at the left side of the picture, how they arrived by the thousands, is a selection process took place, and they were conducted by the Nazis, German Nazis. There were three groups, particularly in Auschwitz-Birkenau. One, people were selected who looked like they're capable of doing forced labor. They rounded up and took them away immediately to just do that, forced labor. The second group were children, elderly, and people who look sick or weak. And those were taken almost instantaneously to the gas chambers. And they were told that they are going to take a shower. They gave them different clothing. They took everything away from them. And they jammed them into these so-called showers, closed the door, and from the shower heads, gas was coming out. And within 10 minutes or so, all were dead. And those Jews who were taken to forced labor, they were forced to take the dead bodies from those buildings into the crematorium and shove them into and burn them. And on the right-hand side, you will see a pile of human ashes. And that's what happened with the Jews. This is what the Nazis did. It cannot be forgotten. Never again. We must remember the horrors of Hitler, Nazi Germany, which happened after 1933 until the war ended in the end of 1945. Let's go back to Budapest. The next slide will show you the Hungarian Nazi government, which was a puppet government of Hitler, created a law that every Jew must wear a yellow star. It was created on April 5 of 1944. I wore it on my outer garment. That's what we were required to wear. Obviously, the children from the building where we were housed, we were not allowed to leave the building, but we all wore the yellow star. If you left your residence, wherever you were, everybody knew you were a Jew. And if you would ask the question, why people put it on there? Well, if you didn't and you were caught, you were dead almost on the spot. So just trying to save your life, you did that. There was one bright spot during the summer of 1944. And the next slide shows that the Swedish government dispatched a gentleman called Wallenberg on July 1944 to look after Swedish property in Budapest as well as in Hungary. And shortly after his arrival, he recognized what the Nazis were doing. And almost immediately took charge to trying to protect and save as many Hungarian Jews as possible, creating safe houses, and told the Nazis, that's Swedish property, you cannot enter. He worked with ambassadors of various countries, particularly with the Chinese consulate and embassy, also with some other countries who cooperated against the Nazis. And they were able to issue passports, able to leave the country, or some kind of a Swedish document to provide some kind of a safety. And he single-handedly managed to able to save over 80,000 Hungarian Jews. Unfortunately, when the war ended in July of 1945, he was tricked by the Soviets to go to a meeting in the border of Hungary and Romania or Ukraine. And he was accused as a US CIA spy. And we never have heard about him ever since. More likely he died in the Gulag. We have heard some noises, then people have seen him, but really nobody knows. And practically every major city in Europe, and also in Israel, there is a monument existing for him, for his humanitarian work to saving Jews. The next slide just will give you a little flavor of what was going on in the city of Budapest. You can see the yellow star, how people were rounded up with hands up, men, women, how they were rounded up and taken to cattle cars. Particularly the left lower corner picture, it is a very significant picture. You look at that, a little girl with hands up. What did that little girl do to deserve that kind of a treatment by the Hungarian Nazis? They were all Jews. That was the only problem. That's the only thing what they committed was a crime. Now, however, moving toward end of August, the new law was created by the Hungarian government, created the Budapest ghetto. And the next slide will show you that. This is a small territory, about 74 acres. All the streets were blockaded by walls of various sizes, and there were only 4 gates that existed to this ghetto. You couldn't go in, you couldn't go out. There were over 80,000 Hungarian Jews were cramped in there. The Hungarian government demanded all the Jews from the city of Budapest to move into this small area. And the non-Jews were asked to leave. I will show you 2 pictures. One The first one, please, the next slide. It was just one of the gate. It wasn't as bad looking as the next one. There was a guard, and of course you can see the Jewish star written ghetto, and you see the guard. But it was much more stringent. And the next slide will show you what actually most of the walls, how it was built. This wall was discovered in 1962 under urban renewal in the city of Budapest. It was taken down. This is the walls, how streets were blockaded. Now, the ghetto was created, and obviously nobody was able to leave from there. Now I will tell you 3 stories what happened during the time of the ghetto with me and people in a building what I showed you earlier. The first could have happened in end of September of 1944. We children stayed in a cellar or a basement. I call it a dungeon. It was wet clay flooring in that area. There was only one light bulb. I never forget that. There were 2 small windows was for ventilation. Every apartment building in the city of Budapest had such an area designated for each apartment to have heating material for the winter in the apartment, either coal or wood. It was a designated area. That's where we were, 24 hours a day. We children were required being quiet and trying to look after the younger ones. By the way, we never did starve. We had one meal a day. The Jewish agency provided most of it, and sometimes actually in the building, since there was a kitchen for the kindergarten, nursery school, were cooking something for us to eat. Whatever it was, we ate it, and that's how we survived. We were living in a city, so we had city water. So we were allowed to play in a courtyard, which was a very beautiful courtyard. Time to time in small groups. The adults were supervising us. And how we were playing at one time, I have fallen, hit my head in a rock, and started to bleed pretty badly. My mother panicked, and my kindergarten teacher, Rose, says, "Hey, Clara, I will take care of Andy." The first thing she did, removed the yellow star from my outer garment, while other people were trying to patch my head up with some first aid we had. And then she hold my hand, says, "Make sure, don't ever let it go. Keep your mouth shut and walk with it." And we walked out of the building, and I was trembling because I was told that I'm not allowed to leave the building. And I never allowed to leave the building without a yellow star on my outer garment. And Rose and I, we were walking to the nearest gate to go to the hospital, which was maybe about 8 blocks away from the building I lived in, what I showed you earlier. When we arrived to the gate, the Hungarian Nazi guard yelled at her, "Show me your ID." So she does, and very calmly. And the guard yells at her again, said, "You are not a Jew. What are you doing in a ghetto? You were supposed to move out." And Rose says very calmly, "I'm a single mother. My husband died a few years back. I have no place to go, so I stayed in my 1-room apartment." And there was a conversation there. And eventually the guard let us out. And we ended up in a hospital. They patched me up. On the way back, the guard outside of the wall asked almost the same set of questions, but eventually let us in and get back to our building, which I showed you. Everybody was thrilled. And of course, Rose and I were extremely happy. The moral of the story is significant. Here was a lady who never was married. She was a very religious Catholic, but she understood And she was willing to risk her life to save this Jewish boy who is 84 years old, talking to you today. There are no words can be expressed. My gratitude to that lady. And when I went back to Hungary the first time, after 13 years being in this country, she was the first person I looked up. I kissed her, I hugged her, and I said, I owe my life to you. But there were many non-Jews like her who tried to provide safety for Jews. My brother-in-law was hiding for 7 months. Almost day to day had to move on because the Hungarian Nazis were continuously going from building to building to look for Jews, rounding them up. My grandfather, my father's father, was hiding for 5 months in one of these basements to basement. But there were many others. And you can actually look up. There was a movie made maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, Schindler's List, will explain to you one individual was able to save hundreds of Jews in his own factory. However, moving toward the fall and early winter, in about end of October, the thugs, the hoodlums supporting the Nazi cause were coming into the building almost regularly. But this one particular day in end of October, they came early in the morning, rounded up all the adults whom they could find in the building, and took them to a collection area. And when they arrived there, they were standing in line, and they knew exactly what the future would bring them. The people who were taken away, my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, and other members of the household, including my kindergarten teacher, Rose. But my grandmother from the village noticed an SS guard who was on the side. And she took the courage to run up to him and started to speak in the strange German dialect called Schwab. The SS guard was stunned, couldn't believe his ears. And his instinct was almost instantaneously saying, "You are not a Jew. You go home. Anybody who speaks that language, it cannot possibly be a Jew." So my grandmother had the presence there to continue a conversation and saying, well, myself, and my cousins and my sisters were all taken from the building when we were living. We came up from the village. So hopefully to have safety and protection from the war. And the Nazi guard paused and said, "Take your family and go home." So everybody who were taken away from the building came back. And guess what? My grandmother had no sisters, had no cousins. There was my mother, one daughter, the other daughter, a member of the household, my uncle's wife. You never know what the conditions are, and you have to take advantage of the opportunities you have. So we were moving toward beginning of December, which will be after Thanksgiving. These thugs and hoodlums were coming and harassed the people in the building regularly, physically and verbally. I have seen it. These people had guns. They could kill easily. They lined up the people at the wall, facing the wall. I sneaked up from the dungeon area and I have seen it more than once. It was shocking. particularly to a 7-year-old. But in that December afternoon when they came in the afternoon, late, rounded up, took them away to another collection area. There were lots of them existed. And they knew what the future will bring. But it got dark. See, the Nazis were supervising the Hungarians to take inventory, whom they are taking away from where, like a registration form, a sign-out sheet, names, address, and some other information. But it got dark to continue. So the last speaker came in and said, we cannot proceed. Everybody who was so-called registered, stay, and everybody else can go home, and we come and get you tomorrow. Of course, we know tomorrow came, but these thugs never came into our building again. During these months, airplanes were flying over, continuous bombardment, gunshots. It was unbearable at times. Our building was hit about 4 or 5 times. The apartment we lived in was on the top floor, was hit a couple of times. So when you looked at in the living room or one of the rooms, you could see the sky. So everybody came back from their harrowing experience in the beginning of December, and how we were moving toward end of December, the beginning of January, things calmed down. We did have the radio in the building, but we never could listen to anything because it was jammed by the Nazis all the time. We really didn't know what's going on. We were completely in a ghetto, we were isolated. No news. But just the fact that things calmed down, no airplane flying over, no bombardment, no gunshots. We knew that the war had to come to an end. See, the Soviets were coming from the east much faster than the Nazis anticipated. And how we turned into January of 1945, on the 17th of that month, there are 2 Husky military personnel showed up. And we knew they are not Nazis. And holy behold, they were Soviet soldiers. And they were expressing that the ghetto has been liberated with body language. We were thrilled, happy. But what we are going to do now? We had no recourse to trying to survive, but where we were up to now. But my grandmother in the village says, I go home, back to the village, which was about 8 miles, walked there, and when she arrived, her friendly neighbor said, welcome home, who noticed her to looking after the building when he lived. By the way, my grandmother owned a general store, which was part of her residence. Everybody loved her. She was just a wonderful lady. And the friendly neighbor was explaining what was going on. My grandmother had a white stray dog. That dog came into the building periodically, looking for life and food. So the friendly neighbor fed the dog whenever she noticed it. And unfortunately, she was telling a horror story. The other neighbor was not very friendly, happened to be, was a Nazi sympathizer. End of the war, he noticed the dog came in and circling in a building. He went back to his house, took his gun out, came out, and killed the dog. And the friendly neighbor said, what did you do that for? And what I'm going to tell you is hard to believe. That Nazi was saying, it belonged to a Jew. It must die. Please show the next slide. Here's the dog. As you can see, this picture was taken in 1942. The boy who is on the left is my cousin Tom. He's a resident in Stockholm, Sweden. He escaped from the Hungarian Revolution around the same time I did. And that little guy over there on the other side is me. And the name of the dog is Bundy. I use that name in my passwords and user IDs. I never forget that animal. We love that dog. So my grandmother came back to the city and took Tom and me back to the village, and we went to school there. And the next slide will actually show you my second grade group picture. The school was housed in a basement of a Catholic church. Priests, nuns, and others were our teachers. That circle around my head. We kids were able to play together. We didn't look at them, he's a Catholic, or as a Jew, or what have you. We had fun, barefoot or running around. We were just kids. And remember, kids don't distinguish color or religion. They get along well. In the meanwhile, it never really came to a surface to talk about my father. But how we reached end of June of 1945, my mother came from the city to the village and said, Andy, I'm going to take you home. You need to help me. I have to work to try to make a living. Our apartment was finally rebuilt when we could live in it. And so she took me back. And I helped my mother as much as I can. And as almost an 8-year-old, I learned how to do things in a kitchen or cleaning and just trying to do the best as a little boy can. At the beginning of July of 1945, the same Rose who saved my life was screaming top of her lungs from the courtyard, my mother's name, Claro, Claro, Claro. So my mother and I dashed to the corridor on the top floor. And then she says, your husband, Steve, is home. Initially, difficult for me to understand what she said. But then it registered, and I dashed up from the top floor to the ground floor faster than a rocket ever could move. And I hugged the gentleman who was standing there, kissed him. I was crying. And when I took 3 steps back, would you believe it? I did not recognize my father. He may have weighed 70 pounds, skin and bone, a broken man in physically, mentally, emotionally. But it was my father. He survived the death camp called Mauthausen, which I have learned later on. Over the weeks and months when my mother was nourishing him back to life, which took over a year, many times I've woken up for screams. And my mother told me, just not pay attention. My father was reliving the horrors he went through in the camps. He never really talked about it to me. Actually, he talked more about his survival to my wife than to me. And would you believe it, then after liberation by the US military in the Mauthausen camp, he did find my uncle, my mother's older sister's husband, laying around. And he told him, he said, John, I will get some help and some food. and went into the canteen. And by the time he got back, he practically died in my father's hand. When my father came home, he tried to rebuild his future from the past. The Hungarian government was very unstable. They tried to establish some kind of a democracy, imitating the free world. They were not very successful. By 1949, the socialists became powerful and took over the government. And by 1950, late 1950, Soviet communism took over. The Communist Party became very powerful. This is when I went to high school in 1951. Those 4 years in my high school years were one of the worst possible years in my life. The brutality of the Soviets were unbearable. We barely survived the Nazis. And then we had to face the Soviets. We were not able to say anything because there was no freedom of any kind. And if you said something wrong, you ended up in a jail or you were killed. Their unofficial concentration camps existed by the Soviets. My father barely was able to survive his business. But in 1950, late 1950, the Soviet government, while the Nazis took it away in the early 40s, the Soviets took it away in 1950. No compensation, no nothing. My father had to work for almost nothing for the Hungarian government. My mother had to go to work. And they made just about enough money to pay the rent and put food on the table. We were very, very poor. So when I graduated in 1955, obviously I applied to go to university. I wanted to be an architect. But my application was rejected, or the introduction said. The government said, I am an undesirable element to the society. And unfortunately, I had 3 strikes against me almost instantaneously. Number 1, then I'm a Jew. In the next slide, please. This is my original birth certificate. And in the 4th column, the last line, it says Jewish. And it was actually translated officially to English. And the next slide will show you the translation. And if you will see 1, 2, 3, 4, or the 5th line, there is the word Jewish. So everybody knew, I am a Jew. There was no escape from it. So if you look at your birth certificate, it doesn't say anything about religion, but mine did. 2, my father was labeled as a capitalist. He owned a business. And communism and capitalism are about 180 degrees opposite in philosophy. It was not tolerated. On those 4 years, there was no freedom of any kind. Freedom of speech. God forbid you said something which was not favorable for the communist government. You ended up in jail or forced labor camp by the Soviets. You couldn't practice your religion. It was not a good thing to do. Assembly, we were not able to get together as kids to forming a club unless there was very strict supervision, some party members. This is the kind of life I had in my high school years. And actually I was more privileged because I was a very good soccer player and I played the game for a government team. But even with that privilege, life was miserable. And not only miserable for me, but miserable for everybody in Hungary. And now we were moving toward 1956. Since I wasn't accepted, I went to a trade school. I was trying to learn the trade to be able to make a living, hopefully provide for the family. And in the summer of 1956, intelligentsia, academia, students of the universities, unofficial leaders, political leaders get together and created a demonstration, a march, to show to the communist government that the Hungarians cannot stand the life what they are living at that time. And on October 23rd of 1956, this demonstration took place. There were speeches. And eventually the leaders said, we will march to the radio station to declare what we want for Hungary for the future, to shake off the communistic regime, like a white paper. And how people started to march to the radio station happened to be I was in the front line. And I have seen it with my eye. We arrived to the radio station. By the way, the whole country had only 2 radio stations, and both of them were in Budapest. There were 2 guards at the gate. And when the leaders wanted to get in, the guards didn't allow them to go in. And that was the first time gunshot was heard, which started the Hungarian Revolution. Actually like a civil war. People who were favored for the communists and people who wanted freedom. And it lasted 8 days. And the revolution did win. On October 31st of 1956, on my birthday, my 20th birthday, I could walk out on the street and breathe free air, created a hope, a possibility for a future. Up to then, you could see Soviet soldiers in pairs walking in the cities of Budapest and practically controlling everything what they have seen and done to the population. And things were quiet for weeks. And on November 23rd of 1956, the Soviets came back with tanks, armored vehicles, with thousands of troops, destroyed everything in sight in Budapest, destroyed the revolution. All the revolutionary government were captured, taken to jail. Some of them were later on tried and executed of betraying Soviet communism. On November 23rd, when this happened, I told my parents, I cannot live in this country any longer. I said, we lived through the Nazis and survived. And we lived through the brutality of the Soviets up to now. And we survived. I have no future. By the way, by that time, there were tens of thousands of Hungarians escaped the country, going from Hungary into Austria. And I said, I'm leaving. And I kissed them goodbye. I had a little sister who was 8 years old. And I told them, God willing, at one day we will meet again. And with an overcoat, with a small briefcase, with a notebook, and a couple of sandwiches, I left. And I was leaving the city to a train station and hiding in a train to going from the city of Budapest southwest. In the southwest corner of the city of the country, I jumped from the train, and eventually I was able to end up in Vienna, and that whole trip took a little over 3 weeks. On the way, the people were kind to provide food and shelter when I needed it, and guidance. And when I was able to be in Vienna, I was able to eventually get to the American embassy. And there, and one early morning, when doors opened, I was let in, and the staff helped me to get all the necessary documents as being a 20-year-old who didn't speak any English, wanted to go to freedom, get education, and creating a future. And I got all my papers. And I went back to the camp where I was living at the time in Vienna. And I had a piece of paper in my hand when I meet with the rest of the Hungarians who were transported from Vienna by train to Bremenhaven, Germany. The train went through Passau, which is a city of Germany and Austria. And then the train went north to Bremenhaven, one of the largest seaport in Europe. It was end of December of 1956. We boarded a ship, and please go to the next slide. And this picture was taken on a ship called the Marine Corps. This ship participated in Second World War and Korean War as transport ship. There were over 3,000 Hungarians there. Young, old, men, women, Jews, non-Jews. We all were hoping that we will have freedom in our hand very shortly. And we sailed through the English Channel. We're going south, and then we were going northwest. When we were going around the Azore Islands, it was a beautiful sight because it was 85 degrees weather. We were all able to sort of sunbathe who was healthy on the top deck. And how we were moving toward the northwest, things got cold and the ocean was very bitter. It was 20 feet high winds. It was just unpleasant. Thanks God I never get sick. And so I had the opportunity under when a good weather, being on the top deck. The only thing what we have seen is ships every now and then were coming either east or coming west. And that was only water. And I always quote an English poet, Coleridge, saying, water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. And it reminds me that, you know, salt water cannot be consumed. I will describe to you the last 8 hours or 10 hours of the trip, which took 17 days. And how we were coming closer and closer to the United States. I eventually have noticed in the distance a statue, a snowy, cloudy day. And how I have noticed it, I started to cry. And those people who you see on the top deck, they were my sort of instant friend on the trip. They said, what are you crying about? I said, you see that statue there? And they said, no big deal, it's just a statue. I said, no, no, no. This is a statue of liberty. It represents one word called freedom. And please go to the next slide. How we were coming closer, it became evident that I will have freedom, which I never had to my 20 years. This statue represents freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom of choice. And we can find all kinds of other freedoms. There is no other country in the world who has that. This is the United States of America, the greatest country in the world. And also remember, if you look at your family tree, maybe your parents were American born, maybe even your grandparents, but your great parents more likely an immigrant, someplace, Europe, Africa, South America, doesn't matter. And Emma Lazarus wrote a poem, which you see on the screen. Give me your tired, you're poor, you're horrible masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest toast to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. We all want to come to America, everybody. Why? Because it has freedom, and it has hope, and we can smile, because we have future. And after arriving to this country, I received a fellowship to go to college. And actually I attended King College in Bristol, Tennessee for the first 3 years. And personal reasons I transferred to Tusculum College at the time, which is now Tusculum University. And I'm very grateful to the president, Dr. Rankin, as well as the senior Dean Hurley, to take me into the university and provide me a wonderful degree of Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and Physics. So the next slide will show you some personal things. And on the left, you will see a picture was taken when I was playing soccer in high school at age 17 in Hungary. The bottom part, it was what is me. Now the middle is a famous graduation picture from Tusculum University in 1961. But I want to tell you about the three pictures which is on the left, on the right. At age 75, a young lady, age 40, convinced me to do something very crazy. She says, Endre, you are very athletic. I want you to do a triathlon. And I didn't know what a triathlon was. So she explained. She said, look, I'm sure you know how to swim. It's a swimming in a lake or an open water. A half a mile or a little more. Then you ride a bicycle, and I'm sure you learn how to ride a bicycle as a child, about 12 miles. And afterwards, run 5 kilometers. For you, it's 3.1 miles. And I said, that's impossible. I'm 75. I never did anything in my life to keep in training. But believe it or not, for 4 months, I trained 5 days a week in the pool, on the road, riding the bike, and running in my neighborhood. And when the day came, the first Wednesday of July of 2015, with my friend, we show up. I couldn't believe the sight. There were over 400 participants. The youngest was 11 years old. I happened to be was the oldest one at that time. And then the whistle blown to line up to go to the swimming in a lake. I was jittery and I was keep saying, please God, just get me through the first leg. And I went into the water on my time. And I swam and I swam, and I couldn't swim freestyle, only breaststroke. I was the only one who swam breaststroke. When I came out of the water, I was dizzy and was dashing to pick up my bike. And a designated place, I got on my bike and I started to ride. It was about 11.5 miles. There were 5 brutal hills. I barely made it. And when I get back, I put my bike back to the right place. I changed shoes and I started to run. And when I was finishing the run, on the last 500 yards were uphill and was difficult. And when I was coming in, I have seen the clock. Well, because I went into the water in the last group, it was 10 minutes later than the first group. So actually, The clock, what you see for me, was 2 hours and 8 minutes and 59 seconds. I hugged my wife, my grandchildren, and some strangers around. I finished. And that gives you an idea. Then it's nothing impossible. You can do anything you want to in your life. Have courage, being creative, and just do it. And you will succeed every time. Then the next couple of slides is really even more personal. 3 years ago, before my major heart attack, I went back to Hungary to visit the graves of my in-laws, my grandfather, and other family members. So on the left, you will see a group picture. Front of me is my wife with the glasses in a base sweater, and my second cousin, who lives in the same apartment building, or same apartment, which was a safe house by Raoul Wallenberg. And then on her farther left, it is her daughter and son, and her son's wife. When you are looking at the right side on the top, it was taken in Tel Aviv, Israel, with a very dear friend of ours, having dinner. Happened to be the gentleman is a physician from New Haven, Connecticut, where I live. And the bottom part, my wife and I were walking in Jerusalem in a shopping district. And holy behold, there's a lady shows up whom I haven't seen for over 30 years. Was a good friend when I lived in Binghamton. You never know to whom you bump into, old friends. Now the next slide is much more current. On the left top, you will see my family. Right behind me, my son and his wife and 2 children. The boy with the big black glass, that was his bar mitzvah picture. And then behind my wife is my daughter, her husband, and her 3 children. Right below it is my wife and I in a small town called Milford, Connecticut. We were walking on a beach, a beautiful Sunday afternoon. The other 3 pictures, well, you will see 3 pictures which look like I was running. It was after a 5K run in different years, sponsored by the Jewish Community Center in New Haven, Connecticut. I participated, and because of my age, I always was in the top 3. Sometimes I was only one person who was in my category of 75 and over. On the top picture, you will see my grandson. He's, as you can tell, a head taller than I am. I look like a midget next to him. And the last slide, please, it shows that I received a certificate of appreciation for the Holocaust Memorial Museum for my activities in the state of Connecticut to educating young children through high school over the last 12 plus years, giving talks in public libraries, synagogues, churches on various occasions, and trying to making sure that we never forget that the Holocaust happened. I was part of that era, and it is significant that everybody learned the horrors from 1930 to 1960. Those were terrible years in Eastern Europe, and particularly for Jews. And for closing, I'd like to again thank Tusculum University to have me as a speaker in the Holocaust Memorial Week. I have wonderful memories from my senior year and an opportunity to get an education from a great institution. And the students who are listening, you must never look back. You always look forward. And I like to quote a picture from the old Negro League called Satchel Paige, who said, never look back because somebody is catching up on you. You always look forward, head high, know who you are, and make sure then you study because this is your job. Your parents will help you, just like my wife and I helped our children to get a great education. Success is in your hand, and it's up to you how far you go. Now I cannot even say the sky is the limit because we go to space. So now the space is the limit. And I thank you very kindly. And if there's anybody has any question, please put it into chat room and Lisa will read it to me.
Thank you, Andy. That was awesome. Thank you so much. We do have one question. Is your story captured in the pages of testimony at Yad Vashem?
Okay, just quickly, Yad Vashem is a memorial cemetery for Holocaust survivors. And also it collects information from Holocaust survivors. Steven Spielberg created a library here at Yale University and supported to take testimony from Holocaust survivors. I came to New Haven after when the project was concluded. My story is not available at Yad Vashem. However, at one day when I will decide to retire from my part-time job, I work for the Jewish Federation of Greater New Haven as an administrator, executive, and a professional fundraiser. I will try to find some time to write a story. But that's the reason I asked Lisa and the staff of Tusculum University to record it. And with that recording, hopefully I will be able to transcribe it one way or other and creating a pamphlet or maybe a book and install it at Yad Vashem. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. That was a very good answer. I have another question too. So I guess at the beginning, some people didn't hear that Andy's major at Tusculum, he majored in mathematics first, and second was physics. We want to make sure because
that's correct.
Okay, Merve, I want to make sure we got mathematics first. Yes, okay. And so you went to King, and I knew that somebody would ask this question. How did you get from King College in Tennessee to Tusculum?
Okay, first of all, I got to King College through an international educational organization based, a nonprofit organization in New York called the World University Service. At that time in Bristol, Tennessee, 3 Jewish families requested King College to take a Jewish boy into the educational organization. And that's how I got to King College. I had some personal issues at the college at the end of my junior year. And there was a gentleman who was sort of a guidance counsel at King College who had relations with Tusculum College. And he contacted President Rankin. And he said, I would very much appreciate if you would consider taking Endre and transfer from King College to Tusculum. And through that relationship, Dr. Rankin and Dean Hurley got me under their wing, enrolled me, and I was able to finish on time in and to 4 years.
Great.
So that's how I got to Tusculum College. We were only about 350 students at the time. We were quite small. We had a Greg Hall and Rankin Hall, and there was a couple of girls' dormitories, okay, and a mess hall, so to speak, and an administration building. And that's just how we were.
Yeah, there's,
Oh, sorry.
no, it's okay. Many of the students probably don't realize how small Tusculum was back then in the 60s. So Andy graduated in 61. And so the graduating classes were only in the hundreds, you know, that it was, well, the whole campus, I'm sorry, the whole campus was only what our graduating classes are right now. So
Our graduation was in the gymnasium, and it was a memorable event, you know, to be called up to the stage and shake hands with the president and the dean and go down in a line in faculty and receiving your degree. It was really very memorable.
great.
Andy,
Yes.
I'd like to ask a question, and I'll try to keep it at one, although I have 1,000. First, I want to say thank you for such a compelling and riveting presentation. Truly, we are blessed to have heard it. I want to ask you about your love for the United States. You said that it's the greatest country on the earth and whatnot, and I'm not so naive as to believe that this is the first election year that we have had that our politics is divisive or anything like that. But what I have noticed is this tendency in political discourse this year that is more so prevalent than in previous years, where like we're not announcing the things that we believe, right? What we're doing is demonizing the other side, right? We're talking about not why we should vote for so and so, but why so the other is evil and wrong. And I mean, is this worrisome? What is your advice for us? Why do you believe to this day, right? Like, do we need to worry, you know?
Politics used to be a favorite subject for me for about 40 years. In the last 20 years, it sort of dwindled away. I lost the kind of interest which I had. I felt that politics is involved a conversation, a dialogue, a give and take, so to speak, going to the smoke-filled room, having a drink, enjoying a conversation, and come to an understanding. It disappeared over the years. Particularly, unfortunately, the last 4 years, I became very worrisome. Seeing Charlottesville, the growth of anti-Semitism, the anti-immigration philosophy. People don't realize that they are immigrants, maybe second or third generation. And yes, I am worried. But this country overcome many difficult hurdles. And I have a great deal of trust in the American people at large. Then they will do the right thing. Eventually the good thing will succeed and the bad things will die out. It sometimes takes a long time to overcome that. And we have to remember who we are. We cannot have the kind of situation occur what happened in South Carolina, in Charlotte. My wife and I, we were there shortly after that massacre in a church. It cannot happen. We need to be able to understand that we are good people and we must eliminate that kind of hatred I talked to you about. And if we work at it and the leaders of the various groups were able to understand what this country can offer, then we will be on the right track. You know, I came to this country when Eisenhower was president. I didn't know much about the presidency, who, what. I tried to learn. But I found Ike, a five-star general who did win the Second World War, who at one point rounded up all media personnel in the United States and get them to come to Europe and photograph the death camps and the concentration camps which the Americans liberated, to making it sure that on the long run, who will be Holocaust deniers will never succeed. And that's the reason I feel that we will overcome these difficult times. Remember, I never go to a synagogue. My mother sneaked me in many times on a Friday night. I never went to synagogue on a Sunday because it was daylight. My mother did light candles on Friday night in our apartment. Okay. My parents had to work on a Sabbath. There was no other way to just able to make a living. I can practice my religion. I wear my yarmulke or kippah all the time, except when I go to Europe. Then I wear my baseball cap. Okay. The opportunity to go to the voting booth and make a choice, even though it's limited. Yes, you alluded to the fact that we have the tendency to vote for two of the less evil. Well, that's how we are. We are a binary system. Either it's up or down. There's no between. But we have a choice. And we have the obligation to make that choice. And I have trust in American people, then they will do that. Okay? Assembly, we can form groups. Within the law, we can express our views. We have law, structure, stability. We have a constitution. Our forefathers in 1776 did that with an understanding. Then we will be able to talk to each other. So I have hope, but I do have worries. We never will regress. I hope we have learned enough from the history. Then we can move forward with energy, with perseverance, and hope to see how far we can go in creating a greater nation than we have today. Okay, look, you know, people tell me, say, why don't you move to Israel? You are a Jew, you belong there. I said, no, I am an American. Okay, I practice my religion. It's a different country. And being in this country for now 63 years, almost 64, I cherish every moment of it. And that's the reason I keep saying, no matter what, this is the greatest country in the world. And that Statue of Liberty represents that. And that poem will tell you, then we are all welcome here, in spite of the fact that some members of our current government try to change it. And we have the opportunity to make a living. So that's basically my answer. So any other questions?
There's one more. So somebody wants to know, while you were at Tusculum, were you able to keep kosher? Did they have kosher dining available?
No.
What did you eat?
When
Goodness.
I came to this country, I had to compromise.
Yeah.
because at King College, I was eating in the dining hall. At Tusculum College, I was eating in the dining hall. So
Yeah.
I had to compromise. After when I graduated from Tusculum College and moved to St. Louis, Missouri, where I went to Washington University, I had my own apartment with a couple of other students. And so we didn't have a really kosher kitchen because it was too complicated to do. But we cooked kosher food, okay? And we managed. And how we were moving on, particularly when I married. And I married a young lady whom I met by sort of arranged marriage. And I tell you a secret.
Yes.
My mother read an ad in a Hungarian Jewish paper in New York. And I was working for IBM Corporation in Kingston, New York, 90 miles away. I was coming to my parents' place every 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever. My mother, I talked to my parents every day. So he said, come home. So I came home Friday afternoon. And then when I am home, she tells me, I invited a couple for Sunday coffee and cake. And then on Sunday, she told me, then this couple, the man has a sister from Hungary. And that's how I found out about my wife. So the couple shows up and no sister. So he says, my sister couldn't come because the Hungarian government didn't allow them. But here is her picture. And she's 9.5 years younger than I am. So I said, 10 years is a big distance. But I will promise to you, I will write to her. My Hungarian was terrible because for that many years, I barely spoke Hungarian to anybody else except my parents. And I didn't write anything. It was all English. Term papers, other papers in graduate school. So I wrote a long letter. And we carried on a correspondence for about 5.5 months. And I said, I will go to Hungary with encouragement of a former schoolmate of mine who lived in New York. And she said, Andy, with $1, you can live like a king. So I made arrangement and I went to Hungary. And when I arrived, I had a very difficult time with the Hungarian government because they knew I was working for IBM and eventually they wanted me to do industrial spy for the computer industry of Hungary because they felt that I may have access to information from IBM. But that's a different story. So in any event, I went back and I met a young lady with whom I corresponded. And maybe we had sort of 2 dates. I mean, I was there, I stayed in a hotel. She was living with her parents. And the second day when we get together, I said, I will be here for 3 weeks. You see me physically. And I had a very bad Hungarian because I just had to try to relearn the language how I was going along. And I said, look, we can make a deal. If you want to get out of the country and you're willing to marry me, I am willing to marry you. And end of the 3rd week, we had a deal. I said, you have to apply for the papers. And when you have your papers, you let me know. I had a lawyer in Hungary to help her. I came back to the United States in January, and I flew back in July 3rd of 1970. It was in 69, 70. She got all her papers. I arrived, and on the following Sunday afternoon, we got married by the justice of the peace. That was 50 years ago.
Yes.
Okay, it was on July 6th. And then I came back, she came back about 4 or 5 weeks later because her mother had surgery and she wanted to stay during that period of time. And when she arrived, I will tell you other secret, she was pregnant. So I found out when she arrived at the airport and came to my parents' apartment, when she told me, then we are expecting. That's my daughter.
In front of your parents.
Well, not quite, okay? But then 2 years later, yeah, a year and a half later, she and I got married in an Orthodox synagogue with an Orthodox rabbi. So I have official wedding, official document from Hungary. Then we got married there by the peace. And I have an official document from the Orthodox synagogue when we got married by religiously.
Very nice.
So it is, you know, and our daughter is now 49 years old and our son is 48.
Very nice. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing.
You know, in Jewish customs, there's a lot of marriages arranged by parents, just like in other customs, like in India and some other areas. Families get together and they arrange a marriage. I happen to love my wife very much. It was a long time. There was a lot of ups and downs, but we made it.
Yep. We all do.
We all do.
Well, thank you, Andy, so much. We're coming up on 9 o'clock, and I'm sure you are tired from that wonderful presentation. If you didn't realize, yesterday we practiced with Andy, and we thought it was going to be just a brief overview, but Andy gave us his all even yesterday afternoon and gave us the full presentation too. So, and believe me, he didn't leave anything out. I think he added some things from yesterday too. So definitely the marriage story. You didn't tell us that yesterday, Andy. So thank you so much. And thank you for spending your evening with us and sharing your story. People in the chat are saying it's an honor to have you speak and hear your story. And thank you, you're a true survivor. So everybody's very grateful.
I thank you very much. Thank you, Lisa, to making all the arrangements and our conversation and exchange of emails. And it was truly a privilege to able to get back to the time when I was really very young and reminisce. And I went back to my yearbook and I flipped through, I just looked at it, okay? And it was delightful, and God willing, the condition will be such that I will be able to come on campus and spend some time with all of you and enjoy the environment, which changed quite a bit, and sort of telling some stories to each other.
That would be wonderful. And I should not forget to say hello to Dr. Hummel, our president, to Andy. I want to make sure that you see each other's faces. So when Andy does arrive next year, fingers crossed, that Andy, Dr. Hummel is in, hopefully you can see him in the center of this, he's in the center of my screen. Do you see him?
Yes, I do.
Got Hummel there? Okay,
yes.
Great.
It's on the screen, yes.
Yes, so go ahead.
And if I could say thank you very much. It has been a great honor to hear from you and to hear your story. And it certainly makes me proud that you are a Tusculum grad. So thank you very much. And I very much look forward to seeing you next year.
Well, I am looking forward to it, okay? And many times I was planning to take a trip down to the south. It never happened. There always something came up, but definitely, hopefully, coronavirus will sort of slow down. And my son is a physician, and he tells me that is 6 more months, and hopefully we are coming out of it. So God willing, we will be there, and I can come and shake hands and hug and just say it is wonderful.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Have a
Take
good
good
evening.
care, be well, and send me an email, and then let's try to get together, okay?
We will get together very soon. Thank you,
Thank you.
Andy.
Take care.
Take
Have
care,
a wonderful
everyone.
evening.
Good night.
Bye-bye.